What was the reception when these two things hit? I mean, do you remember kind of how they were received?
Oh, they were mocked and jeered at. And
Really?
Really?
well, some people liked them, but I mean, like some of the bigger like science fiction, well, once again, like a lot of it's like science fiction looking down its nose at fantasy because Locust was like pretty cold. They said like, like until something better comes along, this will do nicely for now. And now it's like what 30 years later, and like no one's done anything. And I wish someone would because like there are people in working in Howard Study now who are like who could easily produce like a more advanced book, but in our new version, which I'd like to seek wider publication for, maybe as part of paperback, the Robert E. Howard Companion, because it is essentially something to get new readers up to speed. It's like like Robert E. Howard for Dummies, basically. It's like we point out things like, Howard was fascinated by the pics. We all know that. Right. It really is something to get the newer people up to speed.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because we think about your early efforts, and that leads us to the fanzine publications, Cromlech, which takes us to the Darkman, and you can trace a straight through line from the Darkman to the Sumerian, and that kind of critical. It seems like somebody mentioned, I don't know who said it this weekend, that we're kind of in the midst of the Howard publishing boom is over, but we're in kind of a critical renaissance right now because of how much primary and secondary source material is available.
Right.
And not just available, but here, here it's available. You don't have to jump through hoops to get it. You don't have to know anybody or have the secret handshake. You can just go buy the letters.
Right.
Having
that available is what made that possible. Having the real text, pure text available.
So much of that,
made it possible to do real criticism.
And it feels like to the next level. It feels like a lot of the work to kind of make this sort of rich playground has taken place in the last, I'm going to say, 14, 15 years, charitably. Right. Starting with the Wandering Star stuff and kind of moving on from there. The reason why Jeff and I are on this panel is because for the past few years, and actually the earliest one that we did on this was 2004, I brought to the attention of the Rehupans this annual conference that takes place. There are two organizations in college academia: the PCA, the Pop Culture Association, and the ACA, the American Culture Association. They joined together to have an annual national conference, and they also host regional conferences as well. There's the Southwestern Conference of the PCA, ACA, and there's the National Conference. In 2004, the National Conference and the Southwestern Conference were being held together in San Antonio. And at the time I was living in Austin, which was an hour's drive. And I thought to myself, this would be a perfect opportunity to go and talk about Robert E. Howard to fellow academics. I shouldn't say fellow academics, I wasn't in college. To grad students. What these conferences are for is it's a way for professors and people who are doing master's degrees and doctoral theses to present their papers and get published, which is very important in the academic world. It's called a CV, and you've got to have these things and pad them out. And a lot of the universities encourage and actually expect their professors to publish regularly and contribute to the body of knowledge. And if you're working at a small literature program in a tiny college, you might not have a lot of publishing opportunities, and so the PCA and the ACA exist so that you can do a postmodern analysis on sapphic themes in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series, or the Grateful Dead and Fish, a musical odyssey with dope. You know, or I mean, and that's what the PCA and the ACA is. It's a wide open, you know, anything goes kind of a deal. And so we did our first a two panel session on Robert E. Howard at the time it was called the Dime Novels section, and there were about 10 or 12 people in the room, and we knew most of them, you know. But we got to present these papers, and they showed up in the catalog, and most of them got placed elsewhere in the Darkman or in other places. Because I feel like that's real important. If you write a paper that you want people to read, you need to put it somewhere where people can read it. You know, that kind of makes perfect sense to me. I know, it's weird, isn't it? We didn't really do that again because it was very expensive to do. You know, you pay for the privilege of doing this. You have to join the PCA. They make you take a subscription to their journal, and then you got to pay for the conference. I mean, it's not cheap. But I felt that it was important, and so did other people. And so when Jeff joined Ray Hoopa 2 years ago, we found that there was going to be another conference coming up. Where was it?
San Antonio.
It was in San Antonio again.
Back in San Antonio.
That was what brought it up.
It is in different places, but.
And I said, you know, we really need to do this again. And everybody that did it with me the first time went, oh, look, I got to rearrange my sock drawer. Yeah, hold on. Yeah, I'm getting a phone call. And Jeff went, I'll go.
No, my background is in archaeology and anthropology, and so I'm used to giving papers at anthropological conferences, and I've been doing that, for a long time. So for me, this was, oh, sure, do another conference, give a paper, no problem. The environment at a PCA conference is much, much different than your typical academic conference. For one thing, it's more welcoming.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of I would say 98% of the antagonism is gone from, there's no derision anymore. I mean, of course, I don't think that the PCACA existed back when you guys were doing it.
I think it started in the early 70s.
I know the journal was out.
Yeah,
the journal was
out. I think
but
it was around, but it was very small.
Maybe they weren't doing the conferences, because I think you guys would have been received a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, this was from some people did enjoy the book, but many was like locusts. They were not hostile, but sort of condescending.
Yeah.
Right. There was a conference back in the 70s. I know actually one of Richard Olson, who's the world's preeminent Yellow Kid scholar.
Yeah.
Of all that. Again, that's a great example of the type of stuff that, very, obscure pop culture stuff. There was one of the guys that got it started in the 70s, but it was very small. Now it's huge.
Yeah. Now it's a little hard to navigate. For the 4-day conference, they did the program book is
Like
about
that.
250, 300 pages. It's like a little directory. It's crazy, and the vampire studies group.
Huge.
It's like a whole block.
Right. Multiple symposia on
Yeah,
Twilight.
yeah, oh, yeah.
That's,
Twilight, Harry Potter. But, in the middle of this, what happened last year, a few years ago, we had some people come to town. You guys might remember Justin and Deidre. They did paper presentations here. They're working on a book about Robert E. Howard. And again, they were kind of working in a vacuum. Like nobody was really doing anything. And so when we started talking about going to the conference, Justin stepped up and said, I'll chair the session, but I think we're going to try to get a different group designation because Dime Novels doesn't really get it done. So they decided to move us into a brand new section called Pulp Studies, which is perfect because we're not dime novels and we're not penny dreadfuls and stuff like that. Pulp studies is actually a lot more specific, but also a lot broader.
Right.
Because it can encompass H.P. Lovecraft. It can encompass Clark Ashton Smith. It can
Dashiell
be
Hammett.
It can be Dashiell Hammett,
Yeah.
Weird Tales, all that stuff that we tend to compare Howard with and contrast and compare him to. And I have to tell you that we ended up having. Jeff and I thought it was very successful, this first conference. And it was so successful that we decided to do it again this year. And this year was kind of a game changer.
Yeah.
All of the guys that were there, independently of us, not knowing anyone, presenting papers, came back.
Right.
They came back and did another Robert E. Howard presentation because of us.
Right.
They said, "Yeah, you guys were so convincing last year that we want to come back and hang out again."
Right.
We found Howard papers in 3 other
Yes.
areas.
There was James Ing was doing a sword and sorcery paper that talked about Howard and Liber. There was in the science fiction and fantasy section, there was a Irish literature professor named Chris Dowd, who was doing a paper arguing that Howard should be considered a part of the early 20th century Irish-American literary canon, along with Margaret Mitchell and Fitzgerald and these guys, which sounds like a stretch, but he made a great case for this.
His point was that, like taking, for example, Gone with the Wind, it's a terrible Civil War novel, but it is a completely legitimate and accurate pro-Irish screed
Right.
at the time. And Howard wrote pro-Irish in the same way.
Right.
So this is a great, and this is somebody that's not involved with fandom
At all.
At all.
Didn't know who the hell we were.
You know, he had emailed Patrice to ask a couple of questions because he'd seen Patrice's name in one of in the Hyborian Genesis or something. It was totally on board. It was exciting stuff. And then my paper was on the Breckenridge Elkin stories, and so rather than have it in the pulp studies section, I did it in the Western section. So
and that was the eye opener.
Yeah.
Jeff did his paper was on rough and tumble fighting in the stories.
And use of violence as humor, essentially.
Interestingly enough, there was a guy that was doing a paper on Justified as a modern Western, but he referenced Deadwood,
Right.
which had a rough and tumble scene in it, which got on a great little conversation. But Jeff was reading the Breckenridge Elkin stuff and pulling excerpts out and doing them in dialect.
Trying to channel Finn as best I could, reading in dialect.
He did great, but everybody on the panel, they couldn't believe that the guy that wrote Conan did westerns, funny westerns. Now you're serious? This is the Robert E. Howard that did Conan. Yes, it's the Robert E. Howard that did Conan. Everybody in the audience was laughing. They had no idea that this existed. Afterwards, and of course, we took over the panel.
Right.
Like we do, but afterwards, the section chair and one of the other presenters was talking to us.
Yeah, let me tell this one.
Yeah,
One of the
there you
guys
go.
on the panel with me comes up to me, man, that was great. Now I've got to read some of this stuff. Let me ask you something. Howard, did he ever write any westerns that had any, ghosts or supernatural stuff? I know, right? Well, he kind of invented the weird western genre, Well, it turns out that this panelist and his colleague who was in the audience, who Mark had already been talking to,
Right.
in the audience, separately at the same time, they're editing a volume of critical essays on the weird western genre. at the
Volume
moment.
2, by the way.
Yeah.
This is for Volume 2.
Right. Volume 1 is weird western films. Volume
Yeah.
2 is weird westerns in other media.
And when we told them about the horror from the mound, they
and
flipped
Old
out.
Garfield's Heart.
They're like, I had no
Like,
idea.
well-
So Robert E. Howard did this?
Yeah, how about
Yes!
How about Cowboys versus Vampires in 1932? Is that what you're looking for? And they're like, yeah, right?
So here's what we took away, and with this, after these things, we bring everybody back to the bar. The table kept growing, okay, and so here's what we're taking away from this. These people, the people that are coming to this is exactly the kind of stuff that they want to study and are interested in. The people that are coming to do these Robert E. Howard papers that don't know us, and I say that I don't mean that to sound incredulous. I mean, Like, these are people that have no ties to fandom. They have no ties to Ray Hooper. They have no ties to anything. They're literally operating in a vacuum going, I should do a Robert E. Howard thing. Huge.
Because they're fans.
Because they're fans. They're looking for something
They may be
to kind
academics,
of
but
rally
they're also
around.
fans.
And the people that are going to these pop culture conferences are so interested in the one thing that they're interested in that they're not widely read. They do not widely look in other places for this. Well, this is the perfect place to insert Robert E. Howard because nobody knows he did boxing stories. Nobody knows he did the weird Western stuff. So, we're of the mind that we need to not only keep doing this, but we need to actively cultivate it. We need to kind of take over and take some ownership of this little corner of the PCA because it is getting out. And let me tell you the danger, the reason why we need to go. I'm sorry, Gary, I'm going to have to do this. There was a guy that was doing a paper on the Conan stories as a type of science fiction, into thematically science fiction rather than fantasy. And he used Tower of the Elephant, and he used something else. And it was kind of level one sort of criticism. It wasn't particularly deep or interesting. But again, hey, A for effort. Thanks for being here and contributing to the party. The problem is he used a couple of quotations involving Conan's barbaric dread, and that put the flag up for me because those were additions made by DeCamp. And so I asked him afterwards what sources you used. And he literally said, well, I use L. Sprague DeCamp's, and I said, stop right there. Stop right there.
I read I may have to comment since it's Chuck Sprague, but I read the thing you did in Rahupa, and it was the stories where Rogues in the House and Tower of the Elephant.
Yeah.
The changes DeCamp made to those two stories in the Lancer were commas, dude. I mean, to call those hopelessly corrupt is like, way exaggeration.
But he referenced Howard's supernatural dread. And the supernatural dread, all of the supernatural dread, that was all DeCamp's additions, Gary.
Right.
Those two stories, the changes are like commas.
And my point is that DeCamp in those other stories constantly used his fear of the supernatural, his instinctive dread of the supernatural, the barbaric fear of the tribesman supernatural. It's in there, Gary, and he did it.
Let me interject real quick. It doesn't even matter, because that's not even the point. The point is, if we're going to be doing serious criticism on this stuff, we all need to be referencing the same texts, and they need to be good texts, and they need to be the most accurate texts. But they're not.
But contextually, he made an error because of DeCamp.
But you're right. Maybe in this story it didn't matter. It wasn't a big deal in this story.
Did.
But even if it didn't, it doesn't matter. But what if he had been doing something on the treasure of Tronikos?
Well, yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
There you go.
But how would he have known the difference? This kid who's a first year grad student.
My point is that he
read
did
the introduction where DeCamp says I changed the story.
but
it's hard for people to read introductions and contents pages.
it is hard for people to read them, and especially because he didn't know that the Del Rey books were even out.
He just didn't know. He
had no idea.
In the internet age, what kind of an excuse is that?
It's a pretty poor one.
It's pretty poor, and I would say this is the exception. Everyone else they're using the Del Reys.
How do you not know that the Del
What
Reys
excuse
are
does
out?
this guy have for not knowing that
You
Robert
live under
Howard
a rock.
wrote westerns in the 1930s?
The Western guy.
A real fast Google search
Yeah.
gets you information about weird westerns.
I know.
I
know.
That you meant reference.
You know what I honestly think? I think it's not so much a resting on their laurels. It's just that, here's the deal, and this is his problem. The guy who did the thing, he had these books already on his shelf. You know what I mean? He just went to the bookshelf and pulled what he had. Why go buy a new book when I've got all the Conan stories right here? And so it's an expediency thing. Humans do not run when they can walk, and so unless he started thinking unless he made the point of going, I should really do a survey because it's been a few years since I've thought about all this.
Right.
He's not gonna, he wouldn't think to go look for a new weird Western.
Yeah, well, and I think they were also focused on the modern weird westerns, starting in the early '90s with Lansdale, and they hadn't really thought about going back and looking
Yeah.
at the earlier stuff except in film,
I mean, if you're doing it on aspects of popular culture and what people recognize in the author, the Lancers would be the perfect one because they were multi-million-dollar sellers.
It's just that they
That's
were
what
wrong,
people
is
weren't.
all.
If
Yeah.
you wanted to
What
do
form of
if you wanted to do a
comment?
paper on Conan as a popular culture figure, that would be appropriate. If you're looking at the texts themselves for
So
literary
if you
criticism
don't like
purpose,
that,
you
I will
want
accept that.
you want the most Howardian text and the purest text you can get
Yes, ma'am.
if you're criticizing the texts themselves.